So welcome to another presentation of the online ColdFusion Meetup. I'm Charlie Arehart, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And in this edition of the Meetup, our 307th, being recorded on Thursday, August 1st, 2024 at noon U.S. Eastern Time, we've got me. Glad to be back. More about that in a moment. I'll be speaking today on migrating CF Admin settings between versions safely. And this is a talk that I've given at a recent CF Summit East. And I want to take a moment and apologize for not having had any meetups for the past few months. I was giving talks at different events and then suddenly realized, hey, I was never doing them online. And some of the events are recorded. CF Camp was recorded for now only to those who attended. Sometime in the future, they'll be open to everybody. And then Into the Box, same thing. Those are first only offered to people that attended or have CF Cast membership. Into the CF Summit East wasn't recorded. So anyway, just want to say I'll try to be repeating some of the talks that I gave at those events, as well as some that I've done in the past that I had not been here on the CF Meetup. I also want to say that we'll have other sessions coming up, including from other presenters, and I'll have news about that in time. Let's go ahead and get started with this. And before we do, let me just share as a reminder for folks that don't come to these meetups very often. You can find all the recordings through this URL, recordings.coldfusionmeetup.com. They're all recorded on YouTube, so you can also find them in YouTube. Here, there's a playlist for the meetup events. And then, of course, I'm always open to others presenting. And if you're interested, you can visit speak.coldfusionmeetup.com to find out more about that. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. And while I get set up with the other screen, haven't seen anybody say anything in the comments. Can just any one person chime in and say you hear me at least? I want to make sure you can. Unfortunately, when I'm here by myself, I don't have the luxury of a colleague. Like usually I'm producing and someone else is presenting, and I can tell them that we hear them fine, and still nobody. Well, it could be that you're not interested in piping up. I did check the audio before I started, so I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that's all is well. So anyway, let's move on. And let me take this out of the way. Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong buttons. I got to get myself oriented here in StreamYard. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to not worry about that picture appearing on the left for the moment. I'm going to move on. So yeah, the talk is going to be on migrating CF Admin settings safely between versions, and tell you more about myself later, but there's how to reach me if you have any interest or questions or follow-up feedback. Always welcome that. So let's move on. Have you ever wanted to do any of these things? Have you wanted to migrate all your CF Admin settings? I've really got to get that picture out of the way. Just a second. I've got to figure out. I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulty, which I've never had happen before, and I don't understand what's going on. And before I continue, again, normally I'm the one presenting and I can do these things for somebody else. There you go. Sorry, it was just a quirky thing with this StreamYard tool that I use. Moving on. Have you ever wanted to migrate all your admin settings, for instance, to set up initially some instance? And when I say CF, I could mean Lucy as well. We'll talk about Lucy in this presentation as well. But, maybe based on some other instance, like, typical, right? You're going from one machine to another machine, or one version of CF or Lucy to another one. And have you ever wanted to deal with moving settings for that? Or maybe you want to migrate some settings, but not all. That's a little more challenging, but it's doable. And maybe you do want to do this between one version of CF and another, like CF 11 or 2018. You're moving to 2023 finally. Or one CF instance to another. Maybe they're on the same machine, or maybe they're on different machines from each other. Or, again, perhaps between a CF instance and Lucy instance, or vice versa. How would you do those various things? There's various ways, and I'm just going to tell you there are some people who probably saw this talk title in my various social media where I announced it and thought, I already know all that. Or others are going to be, wait, what? There's a way to do this stuff other than the way I've been doing it? I didn't know there was more than one way to do it. yes, there's multiple ways, and I suspect most people are in the middle where they might know even about all the ways I'm going to show you, but maybe they don't understand the ins and outs of them. And that's what this talk is going to get into, is introducing you to these things. And then what if you want to compare settings, right? So it's one thing to bring the settings over, but then sometimes you're going to be in a pickle where you're going to go, crap, is the stuff that's here equal to the stuff that was over there? Maybe I brought a couple things and I forgot several others and I meant to go get them. And now I'm like, oh crap, what did I forget to bring? Well, there's ways to do that. There's ways to do comparison of settings and to identify differences between the different instances, again, of either CF and or Lucy. So first, I'll show you two traditional approaches to doing such migration of admin settings. And again, some of you will be like, wait, what? Yeah, so when you first launch the CF admin after it's been installed, after CF's installed, the first time you launch the admin, it goes through a migration wizard. And I'll explain what that's about and what it does and doesn't do. And if you need to rerun it, we'll talk about that later. Then there's also the CAR feature for ColdFusion Archive. And some people have been using it for years, and some people don't even know it exists. And some people might be thinking, I thought we can't use that because we're on ColdFusion Standard. So again, I'll talk about all that stuff later in the presentation when we get into that CAR feature. But it's a long-standing capability that's been there. And it's definitely better than nothing. But I would argue it's kind of clunky. It's kind of old-looking interface. It involves pop-ups, and you got to tell your browser to allow pop-ups. And it's very, clicking buttons left and right. Maybe you want something that's a little more command line driven and automatable, right? Well, first, but let me just say, I do also want to discuss briefly, and we will later, an approach to avoid. I'm sure some of you have been thinking, well, we just copied the Neo XML files in the case of ColdFusion. The underlying CF admin is a bunch of Neo datasource XML and Neo cron XML for the scheduled tasks and so on. And some people think, I'll just copy those. We've done that for years. Well, I'll just say timeout. A, it might work. B, it probably won't work. And it could be actually really bad. So again, we'll talk more about this later. I know that's an approach that some people think they can rely on. I'm going to argue you should not rely on that because there's these other ways. And if you don't like those first two ways, we'll check out these more modern ways. So first is, since CF 2021, so it's not going to help you from 2018, but actually I'm going to show you that it actually does work even with older versions, but it came out with 2021 and it's called CF Setup, and it's a command line tool. And it allows you from the command line to modify or view or export and import CF admin settings. And yep, you can export them to a JSON file, and then you can import that JSON file into another CF instance. And some people will go, that sounds familiar. I thought there was something else that did that. Yes, there is. There's CF config, which is a command box module. Now, some of you use command box and swear by it, and this was the only thing you'll care to hear. And you'll go, I already knew that, so I don't really need to hear about the rest. Well, you should hear about the rest because someday you may have to deal with a server where you don't have that readily available. But conversely, let me say that to those of you who say, well, I don't use command box, well, time out. You don't have to be using command box. You don't have to use this with servers you start up using command box. You can use this tool even with servers that have nothing to do with command box. Now, that's a little confusing, so we'll talk about it later. But I'm just saying, I think various people will have different perspectives where they're going to be learning things going, oh, I didn't know that was possible. So keep your mind open. Let the information flow over you. We'll offer also some considerations about dealing with migration of settings. There's some things to be aware of, regardless of which approach you use. And then I'll end with, if we have time, we'll see how much demos I can do of that. But I want to talk about comparing admin settings. And there's a couple ways to do that. Cool. So that's our intents for today. I'll look forward to hearing how you think about it as we get moving along and afterwards as well. So about myself, for those who don't know, I just focus on CF server troubleshooting. And again, when I say CF, I mean CF and Lucy. I'm an independent consultant, don't work for anybody at all. I assist organizations of all sizes and different experience levels. We work remotely, safe and secure via shared desktop, whatever way you want to. I default to Zoom, but we can use anything. And I solve most problems in less than an hour. And I teach you as we go so that you understand that problem and can solve the next one like it, or others like it, or help others like it. And also, your satisfaction is guaranteed. If we spend time and you don't find it valuable, you won't pay for that time. It's really that simple. And you can learn more about my rates and my approach and an online calendar to find time and book it. all very easy, at carehart.org/consulting. I'm not selling anything. I'm just sharing my knowledge here with you that I've learned or learned from others. And I will say that this presentation, like all my presentations, is available online. The PDF slide deck is there already. And I just want to go there real quick for those who've never been there before. This is that carehart.org site. I know it's not modern looking, but anyway, the point is you can find the information there. There's a button up there for presentations, and that takes you to this page where I list these 177 different presentations, and these are the ones I've done this year, and then the previous year, and the previous year. And for each of them, like here's this one we're doing now on migrating app safely, and you'll see that I tell you when I've given it previously, link to the slide deck, if the recordings are available, and the description. And so after this call, I'll modify this to point to this stuff. But you can already go and get that PDF. I've already uploaded the PDF of this talk in the current form that it is. So if you go to the site and you want to get the PDF and follow along, feel free. Bottom line is don't worry about writing everything down because it's all there. Everything you see on the screen in the presentation slide deck, you can just go get later. All right, so let's move on. First, talking about migrating with traditional tools, and that CF installer migration wizard. So it runs, and I say optionally because when you first launch the CF admin after having just installed CF, you'll notice that it says a couple of screens that ask you to click on it. And let me explain. One of them is if the instance of CF that you're installing is on a machine that had a previous version of CF. So like if you're installing CF 2023 and you previously had CF 2021 or 2018, then it would pop up and say, oh, I can bring in those admin settings from that earlier version. Would you like me to do that? And you can say yes, or you can say no. So if you say yes, then it will proceed to do the migration of all the settings. And it's got a couple of things to be aware of, and we'll talk about that. And I just want to tell you, you can see this. If you're like, oh, what's that about? You can see it. There's a guide. Adobe has a migration guide. Look at that URL. It's called the Migration Guide, and it's a PDF. And it's about a lot of things related to migration, among which is this discussion of this migration wizard. It's on page 7. You see, I give you a link right there to go to it. Well, let's hop over and look at that. So here's the guide. That's the URL at the top, you can see. And then this is the guide. And I'm just saying it's a big guide. I'm going to page down and show you that it's 22 pages. And in the middle of it is a discussion of, here on this GUI mode of the migration wizard. And it talks about what is and isn't migrated and other stuff. And then it talks also about the CF setup tool that we're going to talk about and some other things that might be of interest to you. So I'm just going to say that's a guide that might be of interest to you. To be clear, it is not a guide on migrating your apps and how would you deal with compatibility issues. And let me say to that point, if you come back to my presentations page, come up here to the top, you can see I did have a presentation on migrating applications. It was last year, migrating apps to CF 2023 from earlier versions. So if you're interested in dealing with migration of your app and issues related to that, that's a separate discussion. I've given that talk here last year. You can come and see that slide deck or watch the recording for that. But that guide that Adobe offered here is just about this kind of admin level migration stuff. All right, moving on. When you do that migration wizard thing, I just want you to be aware there are logs for it. After it's done, there's a migration log and a migration exception log, and they're in the same logs directory that you usually find ColdFusion logs. So the CFusion logs typically. And I'll just say, be aware of that. If you run that thing and have any question about it, or you wonder what it did or didn't do, check out the logs. I do want to say, what if you or somebody else in your organization did the install of CF and opted not to do that migration? And then you think, oh, that's what that was about. I want to do that again. Could you run it again? Well, there's no button in the interface of the CF administrator that says run the administrator again. But I want to tell you that you can actually cause it to run again. It's a manual effort. You have to tweak a couple files. And I did a blog post on this back in 2014, and there's the link. I know it's long. The point is, remember, you can get the slide and get that URL and visit it later. Or you can go to my site and go to the blog and search for wizard, and it's about the only thing that'll come up that says wizard. Point is, I explain in there and point to resources with more on how to cause that migration wizard to be run again. Basically, you would do what, assuming that this was like on a machine, I'm talking about if you had a new machine and it didn't have the old version of CF and you wanted to bring the old version's files over, you could copy the Neo XMLs from that previous version on, let's say, another machine. And what you do is you put them in a particular folder within the new CF versions folders. And that's what's discussed in the blog post. And then you modify a particular file in the CFusion lib called admin config XML. And I show in the blog post how you tweak a couple of lines of it to basically tell it, I wanted to rerun the wizard. And you save that file and you refresh the page of the admin or you log in and it will trigger running that import wizard. So, it could be useful for some people. I would say it's probably not wise to run after you've added a bunch of stuff because it's not clear and documented what happens if there's things that are kind of conflicting, like which one would override, the one that is being imported or the what's already there. And I didn't think to test that. I thought about it. Sorry, I didn't think to do it. I'm just saying, be aware of that. You might not want to run it after you've done a bunch of stuff. But for sure, if you've got a brand new machine and somebody didn't run the install wizard and you realize, oh, that's because there was no current version older on the CF on this box, go get those Neo XML files from the other box and follow the blog post that talks about where to put them and then do these steps. It's pretty simple. We'll leave it at that. I don't want to demo it. It's a pretty rare thing that people need to do. I just wanted to make sure you knew that it was possible. And, I blogged about it 10 years ago, but who looks at 10-year-old blog posts besides me? All right, so moving on. What about that CAR mechanism, ColdFusion Archive? That's what CAR means. It's a long-standing tool from the earliest days of CF. And it looks like it, unfortunately. It's not a modern-looking interface. But the point is, check this out. You can use it any time to export out of any CF admin any or all settings. And then you can import those settings that you've exported, which is pretty cool. It's really that simple. And I'll show it to you in a moment. You go to the CF admin, and in versions the name of the section is always packaging and deployment, but in 2018, it's, and above, it's got those blue buttons on the left, so you might be a little confused. So let me take you and show you both a CF 2023 and a CF 2021. All right, so here's a 2023. And, you don't usually see these buttons when you're in the CF admin. You see it looking like this. So I'm saying if you're in here and you go, what are we talking about? Where is it? What? So it's over here on the left. And as you mouse over these buttons, it does pop up. If I click in there, you go. It pops up and tells you that's the package manager. That's the enterprise manager. And that's packaging and deployment right there, packaging and deployment. And if you click the little menu, hamburger menu, it expands it to show you that. But you might go, well, I wouldn't have even known to look in packaging and deployment. How can I just find the CAR thing? Well, I just want to share, if you're not somebody who uses the CF admin very often, or you do and you didn't know this, check it out. If you click that little search button right there, that search button, since CF 2018, it opens up a box and you could just say CAR and it finds it. It's called ColdFusion Archives. So it's even smart enough that if I didn't type the words, it still figures it out. And it just takes you right to that page. So again, it was here, under here, and it's the first of these links at the top. So we go right to it. This is the CAR page. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but some people go, oh, it's obvious. Well, no, I deal with it every few days. I'm helping somebody, and it's not obvious. And part of it is that I think they got the order here wrong. First, you create an archive. So it should have been first. Anyway, you create an archive. You can call it whatever you want. It literally doesn't matter. You can call it Bob. It does not matter what you call it. And once you create that archive, click that button, notice it popped up a window. And I just want to explain, if that window doesn't pop up for you, it's because your browser blocked the pop-up. So you may see an icon up here at the top, whatever browser you're using. I happen to be using Edge. You could be in Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, Vivaldi. They all work the same way. If they block the pop-up, they will show some icon. It might be words, and then suddenly it'll just be a little icon. Well, just beware. If you're not paying attention, you don't see it. You're like, hey, it's not working. I'm clicking the create button. It's never opening up. It's your browser blocking the pop-up. So just figure that out and tell it to allow pop-ups. Anyway, once it opens up, it's a bit of a clumsy interface. I'll just tell you, if you just wanted to export all the settings that were in a current instance, whatever instance you're in, you just click select all. And that's it. You don't have to do anything else. You have selected all the settings. And it talks about, hey, warning, the Java settings contain system past. You want to be careful about that. And it says, look at the archive summary to see what's there. So that we could say we're done and click close. And at the bottom of the page, it now lists what I picked as Bob. And you might think you're done. Well, you're not done. Now you have to do this second button here. Again, it's a clumsy old interface, but you click the second button here called build. And when you do that, it pops up a new window and it says, oh, okay. So this archive we call Bob, what has it got? Well, I just want to show you. It got the directory mappings, the CF admin mappings, as we call them. It got the data sources, and sure, there's the ones that are built in and some other ones that I'd added since, and on and on and on. And I could just keep paging down. And if I had scheduled tasks, it got those. It's got various settings. I'm not going to elaborate on them just yet. I just want to say it got all these things. And if I'm happy to have exported all those things, then all I got to do is click next. And again, it's a clumsy little old interface. You have to notice there's a next button down there. And then you say, where do I want to create this car file archive? And notice it says you need to put in the entire path and the file name with the car extension. They could have done that better, but they didn't. And this browse button, since CF10, you can use this browse button. In CF9 and earlier, it was a stupid old Java thing. But in CF10 in 2012, 12 years ago, that's been improved. And it's now a jQuery UI thing, and you can point to whatever directory you want. And I'll just tell you that you'll typically want to put it, just to be safe, you ought to put it in the folder where ColdFusion exists, simply because you can know that usually by default, things will be set up so that ColdFusion can write to its own folder. If you pick some other folder, the user that's running ColdFusion may not be able to write to that folder. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the ColdFusion 2023 folder. I could pick any folder I want, and notice it's filling in the name. I cannot type down here the name. I just pick the folder, and then I come up here and type the name. And if I want to, I can just call it bob.car. You could pick a more useful name, of course. But that's it. And then I'll share a little tip. I would use my mouse or keyboard to highlight all that and copy it, because sometimes you go through a lot of effort to pick all that, and then you hit submit, and it hits an error, and you're like, oh, crap, I got to type it all over again. So I copy that off to the clipboard, and then I click next. And it says build successful. And I just want to clarify that it is done. It was that simple. I know it took me a couple minutes to explain it, but that's it. And I can click close. And now if I look at my file system, and I'll open that up and bring it onto the screen in front of you guys, just a second. It was in my D drive, in my ColdFusion 2023 folder. And yes, you can have all these versions installed. Absolutely. And then here's my bob.car right there. Halfway down the screen, there's bob.car. It's only 8K, and that is a zip with the name of car. It's a zip. If you have tools to open a zip, and I happen to have 7-zip, I could right click and open in 7-zip. And by the way, I'm showing this on Windows. It all works the same on Linux or Mac, of course. But I'm saying if you have a good tool, you could open up and look inside that zip file. We're not going to bother with that right now. You can do that on your own. But that's it. And then you would take that car file, let's say it was done on one machine, you'd copy it one way or another over to another machine and put it into a folder that CF could find. I would just put it in the root of that CF instance. And then I'll show you how to do the import in a moment. But before I do that, I want to stop and talk about what about this car mechanism. I kind of went by it pretty quickly. I'm going to edit this, and you can edit it by either clicking on the name or that little pencil icon, either one. And I had chosen all, but I could have come over here and picked things very specifically. And some things are more obvious than others, like, CF mappings, data sources. These are literally my data sources. And notice I could have said I didn't want them all. By default, it wouldn't have been all selected. I could have individually picked some things, or I could have said select all. So I don't have to select all settings, but I could say I want to select all data sources, or I could say, no, I don't want to do all data sources, and I just want this data source. And if I did that, literally right now, if I did that and closed it and rebuilt the archive, it would now be everything that it was already, but it wouldn't be those data sources. It would only be that data source. I will have rebuilt the archive, and I'll put it in place, and it'll be in the same file, but with different contents. It'll just be that data source and all the other settings. Or I might say, oh, I didn't mean to bring my scheduled tasks, and you could do all that. So I'll leave you to explore that. I just wanted you to know there's great flexibility to pick and choose what you want to export. Now, there's great flexibility to pick what you want to export. There is no flexibility about what you want to import. So I'll hop over now to a CF 2021, and yeah, you can go either direction. It doesn't matter what direction you go. So I'm going from an older to a newer. Newer to an older. Anyway, this 2021 has pretty much the same look and feel. I still have trouble looking at these buttons and figuring out what's what. Is that package manager? Nope. Which one is it? That's package manager. There you go. Sorry, packaging and deployment, not package manager. Now you might go, hey, that other one was different. Well, this one's on ColdFusion Standard. That other one was the Developer Edition. The Developer Edition, like the Enterprise Edition, has the J2E archives feature. Standard doesn't. So sometimes things will look different. But this is a good point to bring up. Prior to CF11, 10 years ago, prior to CF11, ColdFusion Standard did not offer this package manager and the ColdFusion archives. It wasn't there. That section called packaging and deployment, sorry, I keep saying package manager. Packaging and deployment was not there. And the ColdFusion archives was not there in CF 10 and earlier. And so a lot of people who've been around a long time never used it because they were not running enterprise, or they didn't try it in developer. They tried it on their standard server that had a license key, and there was not there. So they just didn't learn about the CAR mechanism. Well, again, CF11 lifted that limitation, and now CF11 and above, yeah, you can do this CAR stuff. And so I could build an archive here, but I'm going to show you that I could import it. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to bring all that junk in, but I just want you to see how easy it would be. So again, I'm deploying an existing archive, and I can point to the CF 2023 folder. I don't really need to go moving it. So I'm going to do this and point to my ColdFusion 2023, but I could have, put the file into my ColdFusion 2021 folder, or if I could read it from anywhere else, I could point it to anywhere else. And remember, it was called bob.car. So I'm going to type bob.car and deploy. And it pops open a window that says, okay, I found it, and here's what I'm going to bring in. I'm going to bring in all these data sources and all these settings. And if I'm cool with it, I click next, and it says deploy successful. But I want to remind you, you can't pick and choose at this point. You can't say, well, I just want the data source. Nope. If you just want the data sources, then you got to export just the data sources. So just be aware of that. I'm not going to go into that and demonstrate it now. This is just one of 4 things I want to show you, 4 options. So it's that simple. You click next, you click a button that says deploy, and it says deploy successful. And if it fails, remember there's a log, and you can look into that log. And I'm watching the chat and I don't see any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and move on from this discussion of the CAR. Okay, I already told you that. I blogged about this when it happened back in 2014, so you can read more about it if you don't remember what I said, or you're like, wait, what? What are you trying to tell us? Yeah, just look at the blog post. All right, and we've done the demo. And there's a CAR log as well. When you do the export, there's a CAR log, and when you do the import, there's a CAR log, and then there's an export log and import log. I forget the details. But anyway, just go look at the logs, and like I told you, it's just a zip, and you can work with it. And again, it is a UI, and it's not really suited to automation or to headless environments. So some people go, we can't do that. I get it. If you can't do that, let's move on. There's other choices. First one I want to say again is don't copy the Neo XML files. This is a shortcut many have taken. Some even recommend it. And could it work? Yes, there's some situations where it could work, but I'll just argue it's generally a bad idea. For one thing, the file format between versions of CF could be different. Features could change. Things won't make sense for one version of a Neo XML file to be brought into a new version. It's just not meant for that. You're not supposed to do that. I know it's worked for some people. Don't get in that habit, especially between different versions. Now, if somebody says, well, they're identical versions, identical update levels. Okay. But even between the same CF version, be aware of this. Passwords within the files are encrypted by whatever instance you exported, or sorry, you created the settings for. So if you have a data source that has a username and password for the data source, the way ColdFusion Admin works, it'll let you type it in and you hit submit, and it encrypts it and stores it as an encrypted value in the Neo data source XML. And CF knows how to decrypt it because it encrypted it. It uses a key that's unique to that CF instance, not that CF version, that CF instance. And so, you don't even know this is happening under the covers if you never look at these files, but that's what happens. Well, if you copy these neo-XML files from one machine or one CF instance to another, even identical CF version, it's not going to be able to decrypt those passwords. And then you get errors in your admin and errors running your code because it says it can't figure things out. Well, that's what happened. You can't do it. You can't do it. All right. Now, the wizard, that migration wizard, and the car feature, they both have the ability and intelligence to handle that. It's not that they decrypt it, it's that they include in the file you create, they include the key to do the decryption. We'll come back to that in a second. But the point is, then when you bring that file over to the other server and you do the import knows to look for that key that's in that file that was brought over. Okay, so it knows how to handle it. I'm going to talk later about the negative implications of the fact that passwords can be in there and what you can run into. But let's move on and talk about those more modern options. So let's move on to modern migration. So first is the CF setup tool that was new with CF 2021, and it's in 2023, and it'll be in 2025. And it's a CLI tool to view or manage CF admin settings. And I just want to say, just learning about this, even if you want to deal with migrating settings between things, just learning that you can go to the command line and tweak a setting and not have to go to the admin, that's pretty cool. And let me tell you, there's times when something goes wrong and the admin doesn't work, or CF won't start, or some feature in the admin doesn't work and you can't correct it through the admin. And if you know where to tweak the XML files, you could probably fix it. But you could use this CF setup tool just to change a setting in the admin and then restart CF and oh, it works now. Okay, so but we're talking about using it for migration. I do want to clarify this CF setup shouldn't be confused with the same version of CF 2021 also introduced a CF PM tool for package management. And I've even slipped and talked about the package manager when I should have been saying packaging and deployment. Anyway, package management is another subject. I've got a whole presentation on that. Read about that later, but we're not talking about package management. We're talking about CF setup. And this is also a little throw you off. It's not in the CFusion bin folder like ColdFusion's startup command tool is and stuff like that. No. It's in config. I don't know why they did this. Config is usually where the WSConfig folder is. They created a config CF setup folder. So it's config CF setup, not CFusion bin. And I'll point you to resources with more and docs and a whole talk that I've done on the CF setup tool, but I do want to at least just take you quickly through a brief look at it. Okay. So first, it offers several commands you should be aware of. There's a help command. There's a show category to see what are the categories of settings that are available. And I'm going to do a demo of this in just a moment. So just, again, let this wash over you. There's a show all command that is like the feature in the CF car export. Just do all. Yeah, show me everything. And it would just be on screen. We'll see in a moment. It would just show you all the settings flying by on the screen, screen after screen after screen. Now, there's a way to export it to a file, but I'm just saying you can view things and you can display them on screen. You can just show a category. So you could say show data source, and it would show you all the data sources. Or you could show a particular thing. So I could say show data source CF Art Gallery, and I would see that alone, the things about that CF Art Gallery data source. And of course, any data source you have. And then look at this. You can get and set settings, or you can add and delete settings. Yeah, all that is possible with this command line tool. But again, for this presentation, the key point is you can export settings and you can import settings, either all settings or all in a category. And then notice you can do it to a JSON file. So you can export to a JSON file, let's say on one machine, and then bring that JSON file to another machine and do the import on the new machine or across different versions of CF. Yes, it really does work. So I want you to know that the tool can either be run imperatively, meaning I'm going to tell you what to do. So check it out. There it is, on a Windows machine where ColdFusion 2023 is installed in a folder called ColdFusion 2023. You would say that path config CF setup. The name of the command is CF setup. So it's in the CF setup folder and it's called CF setup.exe on Windows.sh on Linux and Mac. And then I can say the command like show all. And let's just do that one. I'm going to just grab it right now and run it for you. Give me just a second. I got to pay attention to which monitors I'm looking at and get things from the right screen. Come on. There you go. All right, now I'm going to come to the command prompt. There you go. Yep. So I'm going to pop this in here, and I have CF on my D drive. So check it out. I happen to be in that folder, but I don't have to be in that folder. I could run this from anywhere. And so if I wanted to specify the path, there's the path. And I might say, show me all my settings. Now notice I'm saying where is, and I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over this. Where is the CF instance that I want to look at? I tell it where to look at the CF instance whose settings I want to look at. So again, in my case, it's on my D drive. It's in my ColdFusion 2023. In the instance, the only instance I have is the CFusion instance. So I named that, and I'm just going to hit enter, and it's going to fly by, showing me all the admin settings for all the different things and all the data sources and blah, blah, blah. And let me clear that off the screen just in case there's anything I shouldn't have been sharing. I just didn't realize that. I just don't think there was, but I'm not too worried about it. It's my local testing machine. But anyway, moving on. The point I'm trying to make is you can make the commands imperatively, meaning you say CF setup, do something, or it's a CLI, an interactive CLI. So if I come back here and take off the command and just say CF setup, and again, it doesn't matter if I was in the folder where it existed. If I put the full command, I'm dropped into the CLI. And there's other things in CF that do CLIs and command box and other things that do CLIs. So some people are very familiar with CLI, command line interface, interactive CLIs. That's what this is. And it did a help command for me. I could tap the help command. Now I'm going to remind you, I did a whole talk on CF setup. So this today is not a talk on all about CF setup. I just want to give you the key things. So looking back at the screen, notice I can go into it. And once I'm in it, like here, I'm changing directory to it. Again, Windows, I'm changing directory to it. Then I'm doing the CF setup command. And now I'm in there, like I just showed you. And I could do that show all command in there. Or I could say show categories. I'll go hop over there and do that. Show categories. Category. My bad. Show category. I'll go correct that before I forget. Show category. That's a little confusing. It's happened to me before that I got confused about it. So show category shows you all the available categories. There they are. And look at them all. There's, runtime and monitoring and metric and JVM and other stuff, data source. So lots of capability of things that you can manage. And we'll talk more about doing some examples. I do want to stress that the instance does not need to be running. Remember, I pointed to where the ColdFusion instance was. It doesn't need to be running. So check that out. That means you could be doing this on a CF, on a machine where you had CF and you've turned it off. You're not even running it anymore. Somebody says, don't start that. Well, that's okay. You can run this command against that folder where ColdFusion was installed. Frankly, you could even copy the folder and bring it over to another machine. All this tool cares about is what's in that folder. It's looking for the Neo XML files. That's all it cares about. And I want you to hear this. It works even with CF 2018 and earlier. I said it was introduced in CF 2021, but I have found that even though the docs say it's not supported, I have used it all the way back to like CF 10. I've used it to point to things as old as that. And remember, my machine even has CF 10 on it. When I did this talk, I showed that. So I'll just tell you, go watch my talk. I demonstrated that, but that's not the point of this talk. But there I could point to, show all of what's in my ColdFusion 2018. Now I've been doing show all, but there's lots of other commands. So check this out. You can alias a word and then not have to specify that path. So if I alias CF 2023, then from now on I can use CF 2023 and check it out in my examples. I say show data source in CF 2023. Boom. It would just show me the data sources. Show a particular data source like CF Art Gallery. Get from the CF data source, CF Art Gallery data source, get its value called login timeout. And when you see the show data source, you'll see the name of the things you can do, like it has an attribute, in the admin, a field called the login timeout. And I'm just saying you could get that one setting and view its value. And you could set that So notice I'm saying set for the data source CF Art Gallery, the login timeout value, set it to 31. It starts out at 30 by default. I set it at 31, and I'm pointing to my CF 2023 instance through that alias, and it just does it. Okay, so it's really that simple. And I can get other things, like I could get the runtime timeout request after so many seconds. Some of you know in CF Admin on the very first settings page, that's the very first setting. If you want to get it, you can get it. And if you want to set it, you can set it, right? Now, moving on to the more interesting stuff that we're talking about, you can export all the settings. So check it out. We're in CF Setup, and we say export all, or some, but we'll say all, to a file called, in my case, CF 2018 JSON. You can call it whatever you want, from this folder called ColdFusion 2018 CFusion. I can name it, put it in a file, and in a moment, it'll produce a JSON file with all those settings that flew by on the screen. Then I could import that file. So like on the same machine, if I had both, or on another machine, if I copied that file onto that other machine, I could then import what's in there from that file into this instance of CF. So it really is that straightforward. In doing my moving around, I lost this chat. Okay, cool. No comments yet. So, all right. So that's that. And then I could go, I want you to see, you not only have to export everything, but you can export just, say, your data sources. So check it out. I'm doing export of the data sources from CF 2018. And, oh, sorry, that's the name of a file I'm creating, CF 2018_DSN.json. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm calling it that. And it's from my ColdFusion 2018 instance. So yes, I can do all this stuff from the command line, and then I could import those data sources into my 2023, for example. So again, you can come back and look all this over and try it on your own later. I want to just wrap up some discussions about CF Setup. Note that some changes that you make you have to restart CF. That's true in the admin. It's also true in the CF Setup tool. So just be aware of that. Some settings you'll need to restart CF after you make those changes. This is very important. Hear this, because some of you may be trying this right now and getting an error. If you try to do that CF Setup command and you get an error that says Java home is not set, well, that's just that the tool expects to find Java. And if you have not installed Java, you need to help it know where to find Java. Now, if you install Java somewhere, if you install what's called the JRE, or if you install the JDK, it installs the JRE, it'll make it what's called a public JRE, and it'll just work. But if you find it doesn't work, or you didn't install it, or whatever, you just need to set an environment variable. And you can do that temporarily and just point to the CF JVM. So let me just show you. If you didn't know it, let's say on Windows, if you look on the right, in the ColdFusion 2023 folder, there is a JRE. It is the JRE that comes with ColdFusion in 2023. It happens to be Java 17. Doesn't matter. This tool works regardless. But the point is, you point it to that folder, and notice I'm saying set. That's the command line tool. At Windows, I say set Java home equals that. And there shouldn't be a space in there. Let me go remove that because some things are sensitive to that. Didn't mean to have that there. And I'll repost this presentation with these corrections after the talk. Now, then there's the Linux variant. If you're on Linux or Mac, you'd say export Java home equals wherever ColdFusion is installed. Maybe it's in opt ColdFusion 2023 JRE. Now, I will tell you, beware, Linux and Mac is, Unix-based, is case sensitive. So you've got to get that right. If you don't get it right, it won't work right. So I would do an ls command to make sure I've got the right path. And yes, it comes up showing me what's in that JRE folder. Then I would export Java home equals that path that I confirmed had worked. And again, both those commands just create an environment variable that lives temporarily in that command line. And both Windows and Linux and Mac have ways for you to configure that to be permanent. I'm not going to get into that in this talk. So let's move on. That's if you encounter that error. I wanted you to be aware of how do you get around that error. But moving on, the thing I talked about passwords earlier, there's another facet of it with regard to these exports, and not just with this CF setup export, but also in a moment, we'll talk about CF config. There's issues you need to be aware of about storing passwords. So we'll talk about that as another discussion in a moment. As far as additional documentation on CF setup, I just want you to know, I know I went over that pretty quickly. There's an entire page. And when I say a page, I don't mean one or two screens. No, it's like 15 screens there's a substantial single page of documentation at that URL. You can learn all about the CF Setup tool from Adobe, or you can go watch my presentation. Like I told you, I did a talk on it, and it's mentioned briefly in that migration guide as well. So either one, whatever you want to do. And there's my talk. It's called Using Adobe's New, back when it was new, using Adobe's new CF Setup tool to manage settings in any CF version, because I was showing that I was able to get to work with older versions. So that was cool. Now, finally, moving on, before CF Setup came out in CF 2021, CommandBox had added their own solution to this problem, a module, a powerful module called CF Config. And again, some of you know this like the back of your hand, and others are like, what's CommandBox? So CommandBox is from Ortus Solutions. It's an open source tool. And when it first came out, it was primarily a command line tool for working with things related to ColdFusion. But over the years, pretty quickly, it create servers, and you can create instances of Lucy and ColdFusion, and there's a whole world of possibility of the CommandBox. This is not a CommandBox talk, but it was originally just a REPL, and then later was made to be very powerful. And CF Config is a module, also open source, that you can either add to CommandBox or find that it's already installed. Now, it works not only with instances you create in CommandBox, but it can work with any CF instance or Lucy instance. That's very important. I want you to make sure you heard me say that. You can use this CommandBox CF config tool with any CF or Lucy instance that is already running, has nothing to do with CommandBox. So don't think you have to be running CommandBox instances. No. It can work with them, but it can also just work with any CF instance, just like CF Setup was able to point to any place that a ColdFusion lives. The CF config can be pointed to any place that CF or Lucy lives. And I'll show you that in a moment. And it too does not require that they be running. Okay. And even you could technically bring a copy of the settings from somewhere else and put them in some folder and point it at that. Because again, all it cares about is you point me to a folder where it expects to find files of a format that have the settings for CF admin or Lucy admin, and it'll work with them. And I'll show you more examples of it in a moment. You can also point it to a CommandBox server name, if you know what I'm talking about, and you can point it to a CF config JSON file that you've created. So you can literally use the tool to manipulate what's in a CF config JSON file, which you could create from the tool called CF config or some other mechanisms. But again, we're not going to get into all the possibilities. But I do want to say that, again, of course, you can export and import settings across the different engines. That's another real powerful benefit of CF config that, of course, CF Setup will never do. CF config could allow you to move settings from CF to Lucy or Lucy to CF. So yeah, very powerful. And you can learn more about it at its docs. There's a link to one of its pages that has more docs. There's also a docs page. There you go. And those docs, I have a link to that. Let me just quickly show you that, because I want you to see how substantial it is. There you go. So this is the front page of the CF config docs. And on the left, these are all the sections. And these are, some of them, quite deep. I'm just saying there's a lot of information that you can learn. You don't need to learn a lot. You can do a lot very quickly. I'm going to show you working examples. But certainly when you struggle or trip over something or something doesn't work, then just go to the docs. And if you can't find the answer, then go to the CommandBox community and ask questions, and you'll get answers. So let's talk about running CF config. So first, if you don't have CommandBox, you got to go get it if you haven't installed it, and you can get that from the CommandBox site. And there's a box executable available for Windows and Mac and Linux. And I'll leave you to look at the docs or the site for that. And then you would implement the CF config module, though you may find it's already installed in recent CommandBox implementations. But if you need to install it, you just, from within CommandBox, the command line interface, you'd say box install CommandBox CF config, and in a moment it'd be available. That's it. And then now you can run commands. And then again, you can run them imperatively. So from like just the command line, there's this box that's been implemented in such a way that you can run box from anywhere. And you can say box CF config some command, and it will just work. Or you can go into box and then, just like with CF Setup, run the various things from within there, like CF config and its arguments or other command box commands. Again, this isn't a command box talk. I got to be quick and brief about this. Let's move on. As far as the CF config is concerned, it offers a from and a to, and either one that you need to use to name the folder that holds the config settings for the instance that you're interested in. I'll show you an example, so trust me, it'll make more sense in a moment. Or I want to repeat, you can point to a CF config JSON or a real command box server name, if you know what I'm talking about. So for CF, where would it be that you would point to it? Well, you point to it so it finds the folder with live, for example, Neo runtime XML or Neo data source XML. So for most people, for example, if they had CF 2023 installed on Windows, it might be on the C drive or it might be the D drive. We can talk about security another day. But the point is, wherever it is, you point to it and then the name of the instance, which the default instance name is CFusion. If you have other instances that you've created, you'd use that name. I'm going to move on. For Lucy, there's a Lucy Web and a Lucy Server, although that's changing in Lucy 6 in some ways. But moving on, Lucy Web has a folder that has a thing called lucyweb.xml.cfm, and that's where its configuration is. And it might, for example, on a Windows installed Lucy, it might be in your Lucy folder under Tomcat Web Apps, root, WebInf Lucy. And I know it's a little confusing, but I don't have time to get into all the variants that you can have. Certainly you could implement Lucy in other folders and you can use other means to install it, not with an installer. I don't have time to get into all the variants. Wherever your Lucy Web XML CFM file is, you would point cfconfig at that location. And the Lucy server context has a context Lucy server XML file, and that context Lucy server XML file, folder and file, is like in a Windows install of Lucy, would be in Lucy Tomcat Lucy server. And then that's got a folder called context and a file called Lucy server. And the way cfconfig works, I'm telling you there on the last line of each of those two, that's what you would point to. Let me show you some examples. So again, just for key examples to be aware of what you can do, and then I'll show real examples in a moment. You can get help, cfconfig help. You can show all the available settings. You can show or set individual settings. You can list or save or delete settings. You can export and import settings. And notice that the export and import, this is important to check this out because you could miss this. It has an optional include list or exclude list to name what settings to export. So I should have said export there. We'll talk about transfer in a moment. And it's got an append option to control should things that you're adding be appended to what's already there. So I'll leave you to read the docs about that. It's just very powerful. And you can, of course, export from one engine and import into another. Or check this out, there's a transfer. And transfer, instead of export, import, transfer would just, if it has the ability to reach both, then in one command, you could have it bring all the settings or those in an exclude or include list from one instance to another. And it supports all those configurability of the append and everything. So let me show you some examples. So here's cfconfig show from this thing. And I'll go ahead and get a live example up in front of you. I've got a tab open right here. And I'm going to do it. Yeah, we'll do what I did on that screen. So we'll say the ColdFusion 2023. I see a typo there. Let's see what happens when you make a typo. It's good to know. But we're going to say show. That's it, just show. And it's going to say, I couldn't find that. Well, it says that it couldn't figure out the format to use, but it's because it was the wrong spelling of ColdFusion. So just be aware of that. And then it flew by showing the settings that are available, and I could page up through them. But the point is that that's the way it works. All right, so that's that. And then I could show an individual thing, like show me just the property called request timeout. So I'll go ahead and just type that in. It's easy enough. Show. And the order is not significant. I got to put it at the end. Request
at your office door.
And I just see the request timeout, which was by default 60 seconds in ColdFusion. Okay. And those names often are the same, whether it's Lucy or ColdFusion. So again, you can read the docs about the various specific elements, or you just run the show and you see what commands are available there. My point is, whatever is appropriate, you can do it. and you can leave off the arg name. So I could say cfconfig show request timeout that. So Lucy or command box is flexible in that regard. You can't do both. You can't do one and not, you can't not put the property, but put the from. It'll say, hey, you're making me dizzy. You got to either provide both argument names or don't provide argument names. But it's smart enough to figure it out. And here's how you would set the request timeout to 61 seconds in the case of a ColdFusion instance, okay? And that, I don't know if their doc said that or I found that, but you might need to restart CF for such changes to take effect. Moving on, here's how you'd export settings. So you could export from, let's say, a CF 2018, all of its settings into a file called CF 2018 config.json. And then I could take that file either on the same machine or take it to another machine and import with cfconfig, import that CF 2018 JSON into my CF 2023. It's really that simple. And then if I had access to both, either on the same machine or I had a mapping or whatever, the UNC path, if I could reach both from the same command, you could say in the transfer command, bring it from one to the other. And you could also provide from and to be more clear about which one you meant. And then this, look, you can even transfer settings out of, and some people were like, what? This rock your world. Yes, you could take all the settings out of a CF 2023, for example, and move them all into a Lucy. Yes. Now, again, that path is whatever is appropriate for you. Yours may be different. You may be using a server. You may be using a web. I've given you some insight into how to do these things. I'll leave you to read the docs to learn more, but let's move on. What about those two, CF setup versus CF config? Well, they both do things that the other does. They share things, and they each do things that the other doesn't do. I'm just telling you, they do. It's not all CF config can do more always than CF setup. There's some things that CF setup can do that CF config can't do. I would say if we were weighing them in the balance, CF config is by far more powerful, more capable, more flexible, more intelligent. I'm agreeing in that regard. I'll just say that if you're already using command box or you want to consider moving to command box, then of course CF config will probably be your first choice. If you're just a traditional CF person running a regular CF instance, then you'll probably favor CF setup because it's there, it's built in, okay? And if you're using Lucy or CFN Lucy, then only CF config will help you with Lucy. So I'm just letting you know those are choices. Both do work with older versions of CF, and CF config works with older versions of Lucy. And both can be used to automate this, right? I didn't really focus on that, but you saw that every one of those things is a command line tool, and they could be done either interactively or imperatively. And because they get done imperatively, yeah, you could script the whole thing. Box, do a command, or CF setup, do a command. And you could put that in some automation script to do whatever you want to do. Knock yourself out. And Lucy 6, check this out. Lucy, in their new version called 6, has decided to use CF config based configuration going forward. So you'll find if you get familiar with CF config, you'll be able to leverage some of your understanding of how things work with CF config in Lucy and in other aspects of automating Lucy. So I'll leave it at that. I'll just say if you want to read more about it, check out this blog post where they talked about what was new in Lucy 6. And both can be used to configure, automation-wise, they can be used to configure containers. And I just want to get this out. If you're using Docker or Kubernetes or whatever variants you use for deploying containers, you can automate the configuration of either Adobe or Lucy containers. So I want to talk first about Adobe's CF Docker images provided by Adobe. They support importing of car files. If you just place the car file in the data folder of the image or use a volume, if you know what I'm talking about, you can point a CF image and its startup of a container, you can point to a data folder that has a car in it, and the startup of the image will immediately read that car in and deploy whatever's in there. That was the original capability when CF supported containers and Docker starting in CF 2016. That's the way they did it. And it still works today. There's also a setup script environment variable where you can name a CF file to run and use the admin API. I'm just letting you know these. I've had other talks on automating ColdFusion and Docker, but I'm just reminding you there's multiple ways to do it, and you can learn more about that at this doc page. But CF 2021 in its new support of the CF setup stuff, added a import CF settings where you name a JSON file, such as you would create with the CF setup. So yes, you could CF setup, create some JSON file with some or all settings, and then use this import CF settings environment variable when you start up the container, and it would just read that JSON file and import those settings. For those doing Docker or whatever way you like to deploy containers, that's sweet. Now, Command Box makes their own images. They call them Command Box Docker images for CF and for Lucy. So there's Adobe ColdFusion images, and then there's Docker ColdFusion and Lucy images. Well, the Command Box Docker images, they support a CF config file environment variable where you name a JSON file. Now, these are both developed in different places on different people. They don't talk to each other generally. They do things their own way. So there's a lot of interaction and overlap and intertwining of things, but sometimes things are quite different. So just be aware. This Command Box Docker image capability, let's check this out, does support you naming specific settings of individual environment variables of specific settings. That's pretty cool. CFs doesn't do that. It just lets you point to an environment, a JSON file. CF, the command box images, let you also name individual settings as environment variables. So again, I'll leave you to read more about that in the docs. There's a link to that, and it has links to more on that. So I'll leave it at that. Other considerations as we wrap up. I know we're at the top of the hour. Let me just say quickly, admin settings using passwords. Again, be careful. You might have passwords in data sources and scheduled tasks and cloud services. They are stored in ColdFusion. They're stored encrypted in the Neo XML files, and they're stored encrypted in the CAR file. And then they get decrypted by CF using a seed, which is in the seed.properties file, and that differs between instances. And CF and Ortus migrations are designed to handle this. About CAR files, it does hold the encrypted value and it has the decryption key. And I did a blog post on why that means it's important for you to secure CAR files, because the CAR file literally has not just the things you exported and their encrypted passwords, but it has the key for decrypting them, and it's the same key for decrypting other things in CF config files. Now, if somebody got on your server and could get to the ColdFusion folder, they're going to see the seed, they're going to see the XML files, they can do stuff. I'm just saying, when you export such an XML, a JSON, a CAR file, don't just go leaving that somewhere that somebody could open it up, because it's just a zip, and in opening up, they could find your seed properties value to decrypt other passwords in ColdFusion. So be careful. Again, that's a blog post from 2020. And CF Setup, check this out. CF Setup offers a feature where when you create an export, you can name a passphrase, and it will basically encrypt the whole JSON file. Or what it does, it encrypts all the passwords again. So it encrypts them in a way that only uses a passphrase that when you create the export, you can say, I want to name a passphrase, and that passphrase, and now you can store that JSON file at rest, and nobody can do anything with it. They can look in it, and they can see all the JSON, but where the passwords are, they'll be really long and random, and the only way to decode them is to use this passphrase feature when you import it. And I talked about this more in my presentation on CF Setup, or it's covered in the docs. CF Config Export, that's the other tool, CF Config. CF Config, at least the last time I looked, they still do this. They decrypt the passwords and store the decrypted passwords in the JSON file that you create. So you really got to be careful with that JSON file created from a CF Config export. It's got your unencrypted passwords in it. And think about it. How would they have otherwise dealt with this problem? Because if you then imported that into Lucy, what's it going to do with the decryption key that was in ColdFusion? So I brought this up. I don't know if it's been being reconsidered. It's probably just in the to-do pile, I think, for now. But anyway, just be aware of it. If Brad or somebody hears this, I'd love to hear feedback on any news on that regard, if anybody knows it. And not just in this talk, but in all the social media links. In the bottom right corner of the screen, you can see Arehart is how you reach me. You can reach me on pretty much all social media. Other considerations that are security-oriented, I wanted you to be aware. Some settings, when you import them, might lower the security when you do those migration in. And I just want to say that the CF CAR and migration features do detect and report and log if they think something's being migrated that would be lowering the security posture. They'll warn you of that and even stop it and log it. So just be aware of that. That's nice. And then when you're bringing in JVM args, just be very careful, because one instance's set of JVM args may not work when you bring it to another machine. Like the path to Java might be different on one machine versus another. And the JVM args that point to, say, Fusion Reactor, the paths may be different on one machine or another. So you just got to be careful about that. And this is important. I want you to hear this. Such problems as this won't be exhibited when you do the import. They'll be exhibited when you restart CF or Lucy. If something's wrong, it's on the restart that you detect that it's wrong. And you may not think about that. So I want to suggest, lastly, a best practice. Before you do a migration, consider backing up the things that would change. And again, that's typically the Neo XML files in ColdFusion and the JVM config in this. And I didn't name it, but I told you earlier the name of the XML CFM files that Lucy 5 and before had used. Anyway, I'm going to move on. CF Setup, the tool from Adobe, its import tool does make a backup of what it would change. That's pretty cool. There's an example of an advantage. And they store them in not the CF Setup folder, but in the CFusion Lib, because that CFusion Lib is where the XML files usually are. It creates a CF Setup backup folder in that folder. And it makes a backup of what it's going to change, which is pretty cool. So if you do an import, you'll always have what was it before I did the import. But I'm just saying, after doing an import, you really should do a restart to make sure that everything you did works, because sometimes it won't. And if you wait until tonight or next week or next month, CF might go down between then and it doesn't start up and everybody's like, what the hell happened? And they don't know you did an import. So unless they know to look in these various places for logs. So the point is, at least then you could check what changed, look at the logs and figure out what the heck did change and compare things to the backup that you made or that was made for you. And we could call it a day. And at this point, we're running late, so we will call it a day. But I just want to say, as far as comparing settings, and I knew we might not have time, I have a whole section here on comparing CF admin settings. And traditionally, people would just open two tabs and go back and forth between one CF admin and the other. But a better way is if you go to the settings summary page of the CF admin, that is all the settings, about 95% of them on one screen. And then at least you could open those two tabs and compare things. That's one way to go. You can view them as a PDF. That's another way to go. But a better still is, I'd say, use a tool. Let the computer do the work. And so I like Beyond Compare. There's other tools, but check out Beyond Compare if you've never seen it. And you would just, in the browser on the settings summary page, do a select all, and it's a frame, and it would select all the text in that setting summary, and then copy paste that into Beyond Compare. And I'll just show you real quickly doing that, because it really is important that people understand that they can do it. So I'm going to go to a particular CF admin instance, right? And the setting summary is in the first blue button, and it's on the far right, setting summary. So in a moment, it might take a moment, it's going to show me, okay, there's everything. There's the save as PDF, but I don't care about that. Here's just pages and pages and pages of my data sources and scheduled tasks and everything. Well, that's a framed interface. So if I click in here and do a Control A, or if I had a right clicked and said select all, if it wasn't selected, there you go. And I right clicked, and I don't do it stuff by the mouse, but just Control A will select. Notice it didn't select everything on the upper and left. It just selected what's in this frame. So Control A selected everything. Control C, I just copied it, and I happen to have Beyond Compare open. Doing a new folder compare. I'll just show you that. I go session. Come on, pick up. Oh, sorry, I'm clicking on the screen. Anyway, new session folder compare. Sorry, new session folder compare. And it's got, sorry, I meant to say text file compare, my bad. New session file compare, because in this case, we're comparing the settings summary. So it's a text compare. And there you go. It's opening up an interface where I can point to a file if I want to, or I can just drop in text. And I'm going to just paste everything I just got from that CF 2023. And now I'll hop over, and I have a CF 2021 admin open. And I'll go to the settings summary. for my CF 2021. And in a moment, it'll open up, and I'll do a Control A to select it all. And I'll hop back over to that Beyond Compare. And this is important. I need to scroll all the way to the top. Don't point it where it was at the bottom. Put it all the way at the top. And I know it's just a bunch of hashes, but I'm just going to paste it in. And now it's comparing all my settings. And up here, there, I can say, show me all the settings or only show me what's different. So here we go. You can see I'm now looking at my CF 2023 on the left and my CF 2021 on the right. And the things that are different are highlighted in red. And there's just all kinds of things that are different. And I did timeout request on one, but not the other. Oh, I enabled HTTP status codes on one and not the other, right? That's pretty cool. I could quickly, and you might go, oh, this will take forever. No, it doesn't. Other than data sources, which you'll probably easily solve, I'm at the bottom already. So it's not that difficult to compare the key settings. And, we could talk about Beyond Compare. I've got a blog post on it. It's a great tool. You could swap these so that the older one is on the left and the newer one's on the right. Now the 2021's on the left and the 2023 is on the right. I love it. It's a great tool. We'll leave it at that. All right. So there's that, and there's that. And you could even point it to the JSON files and compare them, or you can point to the XML files, because the tool Beyond Compare has the ability to go get extensions that allow you to easily compare XML or easily compare JSON. I don't have time to do that, but it's a cool tool. Many tools cannot compare a big, long single line of JSON or a big, long single line of XML. But Beyond Compare, if with its formats feature that are freely downloadable, get the format called JSON sorted or XML sorted, and you just download it. And again, I don't have time, so I'll leave it at that. It's cool, very cool. You can use it also to compare code and logs and text. And it's got the best trial in the business. It's 30 days of use. So you could use it once a week for 30 weeks. You don't pay for it until you've used it 30 different days. And then to buy it, it's $35. It's just awesome. So I love it. I put it on every machine. As the commercial goes, I put that crap on everything. I put this on every machine, and it's from scootersoftware.com. I'll just leave it at that. So lastly, CFconfig, the tool from Ortus command box, they have a diff command. In CFconfig, they have a diff command. So check this out. You could say CFconfig diff CF 2018 compared to CF 2023, and it would just show the differences. If I had time, I'd show you. And you can add a values differ to see only what's different. Just like I showed you, you could choose to see everything or just what's different. When you're comparing the two different engines or versions, be aware that if one has a setting, the other one doesn't, they're not shown if you do values differ. And there's a from only and a to only that can help with that problem. I'll leave you to look into that. There's the ability for it to save a report. By the way, so it can Beyond Compare, it can create a report, but the diff command can produce a report. So that's it. I wanted to do that really quickly. As far as resources for learning more, remember all the links I've mentioned so far, both at Adobe and at Lucy and Ortus. And my talks on CF setup and related topics, they're all at carehart.org/presentation. So there's one on CF setup, one on installing CF, one on migrating apps, one on hidden gems, one on the package manager, one on updating the Java. These are just things that I thought if you're dealing with migrating settings or comparing settings, these would benefit you as well. All right. So with that, let's wrap up. There's lots of ways to do migration and comparison of settings. For us migration, there was that old migration wizard, still works, and you can even rerun it if you needed to. The CAR mechanism still works. It works in everything in CF11 and above. The CF setup is new in 2021, but you can use it against older versions. By the way, I didn't say this, but you can also download that CF setup tool. If you just Google ColdFusion downloads, the first result is the ColdFusion page where you can download things related to ColdFusion. And one of the things you can download is the CF setup tool. And you could put that on a machine that doesn't even run ColdFusion and run the CF setup tool on a machine that doesn't even have ColdFusion 2021 or later. And you could use it on that other machine. So sorry I didn't mention that earlier. Just came to me. And then there's that CFconfig module within command box. So lots of ways to do migration. Each of them has their pros and cons. They all have some things to be aware of. I hope you've learned a lot about that. And then as far as doing comparisons, yes, you could do eyeballing browser tabs. Yes, you could use the setting summary to do Beyond Compare. And yes, you could do the CFconfig diff command. So that's it. If you have any questions or feedback, I welcome it directly or publicly. You can reach me on all these forms of social media and some others just as Carehart. And I've been watching the chat all the while and nobody's said a word. So now's your chance. If you have any questions or comments, I'll wait a moment before we call it a day at about an hour and 15 minutes. And I can't tell if you're typing. So if you're going to type something long, just type in, say, hold on, and then type your longer comment or question. And if I don't see anybody saying anything in the next, 30 seconds, I'll call it a day for the benefit of others that watch this recording later. So quiet. So much quiet. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I can't tell if you two are the only ones here, but it's possible. And I don't mind that because I know that these are recorded and some people watch the recordings rather than show up live. So that's cool. But I'm glad it helped you all, and I hope it helps others. And I'll look forward to more feedback if anybody has any. Again, I'll have news of new talks coming up very shortly. Thank you, Bob. And I'm sure there may be others out there that aren't saying anything, and that's okay. You don't have to respond. But I appreciate the feedback, everybody. Thanks very much. And if there's no more questions, I'll go ahead and shut her down. It doesn't seem like there's any. Okay, cool. Well, until the next time, everybody, go enjoy your work.